Hello everyone and welcome to the next video. Before we begin, I'd just like to welcome the 10 or so subscribers to the channel. I recently plugged the channel online, just in a quick mention relating to the Passion of the Western Mind by Richard Tarnas. That seems to have done the trick. Don't usually promote the channel. Obviously I do book reviews, but I also do outdoor videos like this as well. So one last thing before we begin, I would like to get some more varied backgrounds. Obviously most of the backgrounds are forest backgrounds. Obviously I've recorded in the mountains in Scotland, and I've also recorded at a church as well, but it would be good to get some more varied backgrounds for the videos. The topic for this video is something I've been thinking about quite recently, in fact. I think I'll just call this Origins, or Creation of the Self, something like that. Now of course this could sound a little bit self-indulgent, but I think it's something that might be useful to keep in mind. I think it's worth considering more often all the different factors that come together to create a person. Obviously this is not a very novel idea. It's obviously events in life, interests and whatnot, all sort of coalesce and make a person who they are, and obviously people change as well, of course. But I recently found a book called, I think it was something like Tartar Steppe. It was recommended to me by a friend, and I saw that the translator of this book was called Stuart Hood. Obviously my last name being Hood. Which is an Anglo-Saxon. I think it's an Anglo-Saxon surname, but apparently it also has Gaelic origins as well. I wasn't going to follow this up, but I saw that it was published in Edinburgh. I think it was by University of Edinburgh Press. And anyway, I started researching Stuart C. Hood and Stuart Clink Hood, and I thought, how strange would it be for this to be a relative of mine? Now I won't give too many details away here, and I won't really go into it as much in terms of the personal details, but just to give a bit of context, I think it would mean a lot to me to find someone in my family or extended family that just has more of my disposition and has more of my interests, because I have to admit, I can't think of a single person aside from my twin, who's been featured on the channel, that even remotely comes close to my, as I say, disposition or interests. Indeed, I remember watching a video, I think it was a Blizzard Entertainment video, a kind of a behind the scenes video, of so the son was the interviewer, and the interviewee was his father, and it was kind of the father was Brom, a famous artist of sort of concept art and dark art and fantastical art, and his son was interviewing him, and they were saying how strange it is to have a father like Brom. And I just I agree. Just to have a very close relative be interested in art and science or nature or whatever it might be, can't say that it's something I'm very familiar with. So finding Stuart Hood, even though I'm certain he's not related to me at all, or to the family, it would make more sense, because there seems to be a sort of disconnect. And it got me actually, I remember I set up an account on ancestry.co.uk, and I started doing a little bit more research. So that's sort of the context for this video. I have been thinking about, and I kind of, not to make it so grand and intellectualized, but in a kind of sense of kind of a dialectic, like Hegel's dialectic, where it's two things are always bringing about synthesis to a higher goal. There's a very real sense in which everything that you engage in creates part of yourself. It is a creative process. Things work upon you to mould you. It almost reminds me of, did I request the maker from my clay to mould me man? Just see this idea, this image of things working upon a person to create, to mould a person. So in a sense, everything is creative. Everything is always striving towards something. Again, not to make it too intellectualized, it's just a very, obviously, common, it's not very novel at all, it's nurture versus nature, all that sort of thing. But I think it is just it's my interest in creation and imagination, and how imagination is primarily a process of synthesis. I just feel like more and more I become more interested in the imagination and creation, and obviously I can bring it even towards myself. So there's obviously writing and drawing and whatnot, but then there's also the making of the self, which is possibly the most important creation. So I think the best way to discuss this further and to actually show that my interest in the past and the making of the self does have a precedence, because I am very much interested in finding the origins of myself, which is a kind of a mirror image of myself, which is Zanturi. And obviously, I imagine a lot of people watching this won't be aware of what Zanturi is. I have spoken about this on my second video for Thitherward, Aspiration. I believe that was the title. Zanturi is essentially a symbol or a word that encapsulates all that I value and believe in, essentially. And I really can't understate how much I put meaning into that word Zanturi. However, the beginnings of Zanturi were very almost trivial, almost juvenile, and we are talking about juvenile things. We're talking about the beginning of the self, childhood, and whatnot. Zanturi began as a character in a video game. He became a fictional character, and then he became almost like a god, a principle of God. I put a lot into him. I do hesitate mentioning this sort of thing on the channel, but I think it's if I'm going to talk about things that are meaningful to me, I'll talk about Zanturi. I seem to be somewhat obsessed with finding the origins of Zanturi, and what I mean by that is, well, in very practical terms, it's finding images, videos of my playing Zanturi. Zanturi was a character in a video game, the World of Warcraft, and I lost all my traces of playing this game from 2006 when I was about 13 years old. Most of the traces, and I have to admit, for many years now, I've been trying to find traces of Zanturi on various online platforms. I've been speaking to people online, searching old emails, just this huge endeavour, this massive, this quest to find Zanturi. And of course it could be anything. Again, I hesitate to mention that it's a video game and it's of that world. But it could be anything. It could be an old picture that I lost and I'm trying to find. It's just a representation of the very beginnings of what I value, and that just happens to be playing a night elf in World of Warcraft. So I think that's just a good example of showing how my interest in the past and the making of the self is not just related to this recent event of the family tree and the author and whatnot, those events that I spoke about earlier. It does have its precedence in, again, this search. So it's interesting thinking about going even further back, not just to early teenage years, but to try and capture, it's the endeavour to try and remember those pivotal or seminal moments that sort of created you as a person. I wish I could think of more examples of how I became interested in mythology and the fantastic and just things that have more of a sense of the reverential and the kind of the mystical and the even the dark as well. Things like this. So it's a little bit hard to put into words what exactly I mean. I'm not entirely sure of it myself, which is part of the reason I'm recording this, thinking about it so much. It is an interesting experience just sitting out here reflecting on various events and images, processes that made me who I am. And there are various things I can remember, just things that just seem to stick in the mind and just don't go away despite how old they are. And one of the very first things I can remember is writing one of my very first stories when I was about 8 years old. I believe it was called Kinshai Warriors, something like that. But even at that early age, it could have been any story. It could have been kind of a mundane story. And this is a key point here. It could have been a mundane story. But I remember writing about, I believe it was a samurai fighting a void creature in a labyrinth. I have a somewhat distinctive image of it, and I also remember writing it on a CRT monitor, showing it to my dad. And it could have been anything, it really could have been anything, but even at such an early age, I seemed to be drawn to the mystical, or the mythic, or the legendary, I think it must just be the fantastic, things beyond the given, and I used this phrase in my last video. I just remember drawing various creatures and sort of legendary figures and whatnot, and me and my brother used to make, and indeed some of those names later became a part of my grand 500-page world building project, Sartoris. So again, relates to origins and all of these different creative projects and whatnot. It's just such an interesting thing because I remember when I was about 6 or 7 years old being interested in football, and obviously I sort of came from a working class background. I could have just been interested in, not to disparage too much, of course. I just mean it's my experience of my family and extended family. I could have been interested in drinking, football, pubs and clubs and whatnot, but that's not really. It's never how it's been for me. Um, but before I get too personal, so of course there's a lot more to say, and every time I record one of these videos, I end up remembering something straight after I've recorded and wishing I'd put it in the video, but that's just the nature of coming out into the woods and talking about things unplanned. So hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully, primarily, it made you think about your own beginnings, the origins of your interests, and again, just in these troubling times, just contemplating life, even if it feels a little bit self-indulgent, even if it feels a bit narcissistic or solipsistic or whatever word you want to attach to that, to this type of endeavour. Thanks again for watching, everyone.